This is the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. We have a quorum, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Rosenthal, and myself, Bernard Parks, as the chair. If we can get some concurrence on the agenda for consent items, and I ask that we go to number 5, 6, 8, and 10. We can do those on consent.
Second.
Okay. All right, on that number 5, we receive and file. Number 6, we concur with the ad hoc committee and also the personnel committee recommendations. And on 7, we approve the, I'm sorry, not 7, 5, 6, 8. 8, we support the April 15th Environmental Committee's report that adopted the Bureau of Sanitation recommendations as amended, and also the Personnel Committee. And on 10, we support the Transportation Committee recommendations as amended. We move those. We're going to go in closed session on item 1. We have one closed session item, and then we'll come back and deal with the regular agenda, which is 2, 3, 4, 7, and 9. What is that? I've seen that.
Consent.
Is that 9? Is that Playa? Okay. All right. Let me just correct one thing. On closed session, we have item 1 and item 9. We have a quorum, Mr. Weezer, Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Rosenthal, and Bernard Parks as the chair. Just as those who are visiting, if you have any interest in any of the items that are on the agenda, if you would make out a card, we can certainly ensure that you speak before any decision is made by this committee. We just come out of closed session on item 1 and item 9. If we have no other cards, I would like to move on item 9, that as directed by a letter from the city attorney on page 3, that we as a committee adopt the language that has been forwarded to us based on the writ from the court that is listed as action required, and that we can ask the clerk that we make that verbatim in our report as recommended by the city attorney's office. Anybody? So we move that item number 9 with that specific direction that the language from the writ be a part of the report in its exact context. Okay. And also on item 1, if we can get that calendared at council as quickly as possible so we can cut down on the interest that is accruing. Okay, we can go to the regular calendar now.
Okay, item number 2 of the regular agenda is a motion relative to a discussion with the city controller, CAO, and CLA concerning a controller's memo dated June 12, 2008, relative to the potential cancellation of encumbrances.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Lamb from the Controller. In May, when the city's property tax was down $16 million, we started taking a harder look at where we were at we anticipate being at year end. Property tax is now down $17 million from the adopted budget. Documentary transfer tax is down $8 million. We are still anticipating that total general fund receipts will be below, somewhere between $30 and $50 million below the most recent revised budget. The council earlier has given the controller and the CAO authority to cancel encumbrances at June 30th to bring expenditures and encumbrances in line with revenue. We felt that it was appropriate to notify departments to start taking a look at encumbrances and hopefully reduce encumbrances, but also look at potential encumbrances that could be canceled as we get into the year-end closing process. We hope this time next week we will know where our revenue is, but because of the nature of the budget and the way the source of funding works, we will not know on the expenditure and encumbrance side until departments give us their reversion worksheets and we complete an analysis of those reversion worksheets. We expect that that would be towards the end of the 3rd week of July. We anticipate coming back to this committee with a report the 1st of August. But the way things look right now, it looks like we will be very close, that we may not have any reversions, or we actually may be in a situation where we have to cancel encumbrances. We won't know that for about 3 more weeks.
Let me ask you, when we were going through, I guess, budget hearings, I don't think this figure ever got this high. And is it just a sudden drop in our revenue, or is it unexpected? Because we were basically advised through most of the budget hearings that at maximum we could break even and might even come out in the black. And so these numbers are somewhat at late in this fiscal year.
It was, the property tax was completely unexpected. The documentary transfer tax, the original budget was $157 million. It was taken down to $141 million. Actual receipts are $133 million.
That's on property?
That's documentary transfer tax. The property tax was down $17 million in May. We had anticipated $5 million in June. We got $4 million. We have not received the $10 million on the signage for the convention center. We have worked with the CLA, the CAO, to get the $5 million on the fiber, which is $5 million below the revised budget. Get the $9.1 million on the LED, but we still have revenues out there. The revenues are due in tomorrow, and then some adjustments. So we will know with certainty on the revenue this time next week.
Okay. Now let me go back on transfer, on just general property tax. What are we down on that?
17 million.
17 on the property tax. And then you say on transfer tax was how much?
133, down 8 from the revised budget.
133 we received,
Right.
but we expected 150.
Originally, it was 157. We took it down, the budget took it down to, during the year, took it down to 141, and we've received 133.
So that's 8 million less than what you were thinking.
Yes, sir.
Toward the end.
Now, we will know as of, I guess, today, as to issues of the fiber, issues of the signage, for those to be issued.
We're not going to get the signage. We've received 5 million on the fiber, and we've received 9.1 million on the LEDs.
So we have gotten the LED.
Right.
Councilman, I just wanted to clarify that the signage issue with regard to the convention center, that we knew at the fourth FSR, we made a decision that we weren't going to take the $10 million payment up front, and that we were going to get the payment over time so that we wouldn't take such a discount by getting it lump sum in the beginning. So that's really not an issue at this point. It's more the issue of revenue not coming in during May and June since the fourth FSR.
I would also add on the fiber, the $5 million fiber payment, that is structured as a down payment, and there may be additional funds next year, although that is, any additional funds at this point haven't been determined.
And then what do we expect, is that mid-July that we'll get all these numbers and know exactly what the revenues are?
We anticipate knowing what the revenues are this time next week. The offsetting on the expenditures and the encumbrances, third week of July, with a report to you on the 1st of August.
Okay. So what do we think in the sense of we ended up with what, 193 on the reserve fund?
We anticipate that as things stand right now, if you take into all of consideration all of the assumptions that we have to make at this point, that the reversion to the reserve fund will be positive or negative by a slight amount. We're talking 5 to 10 million. So we do not anticipate getting the 45 million reversion to the reserve fund at this point.
Go over that again. What would be the final number when you?
At this point, until we do the reversion worksheets and look at the expenditure and encumbrance side, we won't know. But
I didn't quite understand your earlier statement. If we said within positive or negative about 10, we're saying within an average there. But are we saying, are we looking that the reserve fund could drop to the 140s, the 130s? Or do we have any idea on that?
around from the 195 to about 150, something like that. That's a possibility. It may be slightly higher. Again, because of the nature of the budget, we don't know until we get further on in the closing process.
Okay. And then on this end of this fiscal year, what is the amount of the encumbrances that we've eliminated?
At this point, we haven't eliminated any, but the encumbrances as of today are 200 million on non-salary encumbrances. Last year, they were 231. This year, at this point, they're 200.
So the first week of July, we should have some information, and then by mid-July, we should have all of the information.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. The first correspondence we received from the controller was May 8th, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it indicates in there, I think, requesting the authorization to work with departments to reduce year-end encumbrances should year-end expenditures and encumbrances exceed either appropriations or receipts.
Right.
Was that done by the CAO or anyone as far as talking to those departments that were encumbering?
Well, we do this on an annual basis to accelerate the closing, because every year, except for last year, there are departments that are minor variations, 100,000 here, a couple of 100,000 there. And the total over the life of that has been about 9 million. So we did not think that that was going to be anything out of the ordinary. The area that we got into in terms of concern is when we saw documentary transfer tax in May continue to deteriorate, and then we saw property tax deteriorate pretty substantially.
And that, if the letter, this was sent May 8th, when did that data come available?
Generally, we get from the county, we call the county, and 12th or 13th, we get information on the documentary transfer tax. The property tax is due in on the 20th of the month.
So, so you sent the letter, this is the Controller's Office, on June 12th. Was that based on new information in June or information you got May 12th?
That was based on the earlier May 20th, because if you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a glitch on the county property tax, where there was property tax that was supposed to be received in May that was not received until the following fiscal year. So when we knew property tax was down, the first thing we did was contact the county to find out if this was a glitch or whether it was an accurate number. And then we also looked at encumbrances. When we submitted our letter to the city council, when the council was considering the tax and revenue anticipation notes, we requested an additional $50 million, and our assumption at the time was that encumbrances at the end of the year would be $133 million. Well, encumbrances at this point are $200 million. So that in turn affects the whole thing. So we were seeing encumbrances go up on the one side, and on the other side, we were seeing revenue go down.
Yes, my question is, at what point, because I remember Karen Sisson saying at some point, we're concerned, I think this was the end of our budget, which was, we've gotten some numbers from the county, we think they may be wrong, and therefore, we're not taking any action now, because we sit here as elected officials. I'm just, generally talking about how do we look at this differently in the future, because now we're at a point that it's June 30th, so encumbrances have happened already. At what point, because I know there was a mayor's executive directive at some point in June 12th, and Ray spoke to me the other day about the concern in this amount. We wait 3 more weeks, encumbrances become not only encumbrances, but potentially real expenditures going forward. So I'm trying to figure out, when was the, pound the table, stop everything, message? Is it the June 12th? Was it the May 8th? Or was it the mayor's executive directive? What was it for those of us that sit at the budget committee and are asking, now sometimes after the fact, where we can go back to some of these departments and say, we want you to unencumber those things. But right now, we're in a catch-up.
That is correct. Ray Schwan, CAO. When the controller put out their May 8th letter, that's sort of something that they have released every year to help them manage the year-end close. As data started trickling towards the end of May, we got some of the documentary transfer tax numbers. We got some of the property tax numbers, but there was, towards the end of the month, there's a lot of phone calls and exchange of information going back and forth, because as Bill mentioned earlier, we're concerned that maybe we might have this glitch again, similar that we had a couple of years ago, where we were expecting a pot of money, but it came in July of August. And we wanted to make sure both the controller staff and staff from the CAO's office were in contact with the county to make sure that we weren't in the same situation. And so the numbers really started, I want to say, tightening up in the first couple of weeks of June. Now, property tax and documentary transfer tax were 2 big pots of concerns where we're short, but there's a lot of other things. We have a lot of other accounts, Department of Receipts, fees and fines, things of that sort, where we're still tracking, and we didn't have final numbers. Things, now we're at the close, pretty much the end of the month, and it looks like we're going to be down at a minimum probably about $40 million in a lot of these categories.
Minimum is the key word there. Yeah.
Minimum, yes. The controller released their June 12th letter, sort of highlighting issues where we may need to disencumber some of these funds. The mayor's office as well has been trying to work with departments and get them to disencumber much of their monies. They are asking them to look at the office and admin accounts and some of the other accounts where perhaps there might be some ability to free up some of the monies. I think from the data that we're, with encumbrances being up at 200, not sure exactly whether departments have taken some real proactive steps there, but we are at the point where pretty much by the end of the week we're going to know where our revenue is. Reversions, we'll get some of that data towards the third week of July, give us a sense of source of fund. Then we're going to really have a good idea as far as how much money, where we're short, whether we have to ask departments and disencumber or whether we just borrow from the reserve fund. I think at a minimum we can expect that our reserve fund balance for next year, we're going to be down at least $40 million.
And last year, did we take from the reserve fund?
Not for encumbrances, no. The authority that we have.
My question is, a June 12th letter comes out from the Controller's Office, a mayor's executive directive. At what point does, whether it's the Controller's Office or the council or the mayor, say to departments, we meant it, stop? Because if you look at this, it says the department should and cancel those that are not required. Prepare a list of that be canceled in early July. I don't know if you've received that information from the departments. But if I'm a department, just like in a budget year, I mean, we've cut, but, we always have this loss, and then we find some money, and people are like, well, I've always done it this way. They'll find the money. They'll go to the reserve fund. They'll do whatever. And I don't get a sense from departments or others that this is different, although it does mention that in a controller's letter. At what point, who is ultimately responsible to say, you cannot encumber anymore right now? Is it the council that ultimately says that? Is it the controller?
It is not.
I'm asking, I'm from a logistical standpoint. I mean, because like I said, I feel like I'm, we're after the fact versus before the fact. And and it seems like the letters went out that said, don't do this. But if I'm a department, and now if I hear in 3 weeks we're going to unencumber, I'm going to try to, if I can, expend those, because then you can't really take them back.
Well, and one of the things we were trying to do, and hindsight, not as effectively as should, but this committee expressed concern last year that we didn't identify things until July. We were trying to identify the issue sooner this year and trying to get it out, but it's also, this type of situation comes along every 12 to 14 years. And so the institutional knowledge of how to approach it goes away. And what we were, I think, hoping as much as anything else is that we would have countervailing revenues, that some of our other revenues would be up and offset it. And so we didn't want to panic everybody into stopping everything now, because the city continues across fiscal years. And so encumbrances are an important part of that. Looking back on it, hindsight, my boss thinks that the letter that went out at the time was not strong enough and that I should have put together a stronger letter. And she's probably right.
So I guess that's just my question is as we go forward, because this is not going to be a better year next year, it's going to be a worse year. And so that there's no misinterpretation by our department heads or others, I think I'd like to see how we ensure that if a letter goes out from the controller that it and specifically says, I want you to do these two things, that there's some either immediate, if required, an immediate adoption by the city council at the same time, or there is some other force of law in the way to do that in the future, and not really wait, because I'm concerned about waiting, and I shared this with Ray the other day, waiting till August or September to make some of these changes, because the hole is only going to get deeper. It's not like the summer we're going to see a huge amount of new money coming in necessarily from property tax or documentary transfer tax.
Very true. One of the, unfortunately, the situation this year is we had this drop off in towards the last month of the year, which, as we know, as we go through this process, we went through the mid-year, fourth FSR, et cetera, it gets very difficult to sort of take actions to sort of address the issue in a timely fashion. I have a list of encumbrances. The issue that we are facing again, that we faced last year, is I don't know the source of funds behind these. And as we go through this process, I still can't tell you of the $200 million in encumbrances, how much is actual general fund versus a special fund. We could perhaps give some averages based on historical data, but I can't tell you exactly what it is, and that sort of leads or feeds into the problem of not knowing, well, when do you actually pull the trigger?
Right.
Because departments, they have the appropriation authority. I mean, we've given them the authority. They are expecting to expend the money for their programs and services. And then now it's sort of in the last, it'd be June, and we'd be pulling, I don't want to say we're pulling the rug out of them, but it's pulling back, and they had expected to sort of carry forward with whatever they need to do.
And you don't want to go after those departments that have followed the rules and stayed within their budget, and, you know, because I'm sure there's a portion of them that have really stayed within their budget, and they've not overexpended, and it would be unfortunate for them to be the losers in this, because there have been other departments that have, for whatever reason, over expended. So I guess I really want to, Mr. Parks, and you asked him the question, which is, this is serious business, and whatever date we want to set as the date in which we're going to make a decision as to where we will unencumber, we need to do that and to tell the departments we're serious about that, and what are the kinds of things that we're going to look at unencumbering. Equipment, those kinds of things, office furniture, whatever. It may be things that are not instrumental to the daily operations necessarily in the city of Los Angeles. So I just don't want us to go with another time and they keep going on and encumbering things without their understanding that we're serious, because this $50 million is only going to grow.
That's true. I mean, at this point, there's certainly various criteria that are laid out by the mayor's office and the controller as far as encumbering, discretionary encumbering. We do have council actions that allow departments to sort of encumber, but we're the last day of the fiscal year. We'll get our revenue number, I'm sure, by the end of the week, if not the beginning of next week. And our task for next week is actually start going through the encumbrances and figuring out, prioritizing what is available to be released. What would we look at? Would we start with the equipment accounts? We start with some expense accounts and sort of draft some criteria. And we may, because this sort of process takes some time, a lot of the encumbrances may actually clear and be converted into expenditures, and at which point then we may ultimately have to just borrow from the reserve fund to close the books. Part of the reserve fund, though, though we don't particularly like this situation, but part of the reserve fund, the contingency, is to deal with unforeseen circumstances. Unfortunately, we're going to probably have to draw upon that this year. We just realized that we're going to start next year a lot lower than where we wanted to be, and we'll probably come forward with some recommendations to shore that back up.
I just think that this loss that we've had in the revenue is an unforeseen circumstance. Going forward, it's not unforeseen. I mean, we need to be as conservative as possible in that. Then that's where. Okay. So I don't know, Mr. Parks, if you're going to have a report back in 2 weeks
Well,
as
I was
to
thinking
where
about holding this item in the
Committee.
committee, and that we'd get a briefing each week.
each week.
so we
Great,
could resolve.
fabulous.
Let me just add to what Ms. Gruhl was saying, and looking forward to the future, Ms. Gruhl, in a position that might even be more effective with that issue. As we go forward, and we know that the transfer tax and we know that the property tax revenues will be less, do you know enough about those tea leaves to help us with the 08-09 budget? And when we have a report back, say in September, first quarter, will we be able to revise our revenue streams and therefore take action on what might have to be cuts in the 08-09 budget, even beyond where we were through the budget process?
We're planning to come back with some recommendations early on in August. For example, the property tax, it looks like from the data, it's basically the collection rate. The delinquency rate is increasing, and so that parlayed in about 17 million this year. That most certainly is going to be carried forward next year.
Right.
And that's something we're going to be taking a close look at.
And then the second issue, which is an unknown, because obviously whatever the property tax is, it'll be, and whatever the transfer tax will be, and we know it's going to be probably less in 08, 09 in that time frame. The other is the state budget and our relationship to the state budget and some of our critical needs. In our 08, 09 budget, are there revenues that we are expecting from the state, or is this budget process that they're in with so many unknowns, and it is July 1st tomorrow, they don't have their budget on time, once again, and God knows how they're going to work it through the summer and when they're going to do it and what they're going to end up with and not end up with. Will that impact us again in our sensing of our first quarter of 08, 09?
I think so. I think it's a very valid point. We're going to hear a little bit later where we're looking at possibly some a little less revenue with the gas tax. But as you just mentioned, they have not settled, and I think they have a long ways to go. As soon as we get any information back from the state, we're going to get it to you.
Tied in that is our lobbying effort, the mayor's lobbying effort, the councils, the people we have up in Sacramento, taking a look at our revenue stream potentials there and protecting us or fighting for us within the context of the elected officials that are there from the LA City area. Do we know?
From what I understand, I believe we have folks that are trying to push and hold our cause, as well as our folks, our brethren with the League, California Cities. So.
Mr. Chair, we have another budget meeting somewhere in the next short...
14th?
14.
Our next meeting is the 16th. It's not next week, but the week after. So that's the 16th.
Well, I'm just curious if we could ask our Sacramento crowd to come down and give us an update.
14th.
14th. Do you think we could ask as part of this, them come back, that our folks in Sacramento give us a report on the budget status, our people who work that group?
As far as the lobbyists?
Yeah.
Now, the last I heard is that our lobbyists in Sacramento, the positions have not been filled. Or have we gotten an update on that?
I actually am not aware of the official positions, but I think the mayor's office question.
I mean, I would frankly like an update in 2 weeks from the mayor's office on the status of the budget in this context on our 08-09 budget.
Ben Sehel with the mayor's office. Yes, on the 14th, we could provide you with the status as to what we've been hearing and what we've been working on relative to protecting our dollars here in the city.
Great. Thank you.
Let me just ask Ray, we have a managed hiring process for people. Can we develop a managed spending process towards the end of the fiscal year for encumbrances? Because the reason for the managed hiring is that we found that even though we say don't hire, folks would go higher, and you would have more people on. We thought the issue of the encumbrances, is there an ability that we have a similar process that does not allow those encumbrances to go through that would eventually become expenditures after a decision was made that we're not going to spend any more money?
That's probably possible. I think it boils down to, sort of timing and how quickly we can come to, can agree as far as where we need to be and where we need to sort of set off the spigot and what have you. It gets difficult for departments. I mean, we ask them to provide a certain level of services, and usually a lot of that will be spread over the year, and if we're going to close things down, then we have to realize that there's going to be some effect to some of the services and programs that they're providing.
But see, I think we understand that, but I think in the problem that we run into, like we're here today, if we've closed down the budget in a month ago and thought that we had a spending plan for 08-09, and then what we're grappling with today is basically not only can we get out of this year in a reasonable situation, but we're basically unraveling 08-09 at the same time. And so we have to have I mean, here we did all the high fives, and we've returned books to the library, and we did sidewalks. Now, all of those are threatened with what we're trying to get out of this fiscal year. And so it would appear if we can put a managed hiring plan together for people, that they have to go through a extra process during what we call that managed hiring. That's got to be a extra process of saying that you get permission to spend something after a certain date that's been declared by the controller, by the council, not to spend any more money. Because if, what we find in this budget, it's a no harm, no foul. You spend it, and if you're not supposed to, people go, oh, shucks, and there's no ability to come back next year and say, well, you lose money out of next year's budget. And so we're constantly penalizing those who follow the rules, and we're giving, favor to those who choose not to follow the rules. And so it just seems as though at some point we have to have an ability to create just as we do managed hiring, we have managed expenditures that say, when this decision is made, then there are no expenditures unless they go through another process. So if we can look at that and maybe discuss it for next week or whenever we have our next meeting, to really figure out how do we get out of these year-end difficulties without tearing apart a budget that we haven't even gotten into. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
Is July 1st tomorrow. We thought we'd at least have a breather and say, can we get through July? We can't even get out of June. And so, but like I said, let's look at that and see.
We'll take a look at that, yeah.
We'll hold this item for the next meeting on the 14th? 14th, and we'll have discuss this, what updated information we have at that time.
Including, of course, the lobbying effort and an update on
Yeah,
the budget.
update, as far as update of Sacramento.
Okay. Item number 3 is a motion relative to amending instructions and or recommendations contained in the report of the Budget and Finance Committee adopted by the Council on May 19th, 2008, concerning the 2008-09 adopted budget.
Let me just ask, is that CLA, the CAO, the one thing I think, and my colleagues can correct me, but I think it may be easier for us, with 97 and 98, I think we tried to be very specific during the budget, but that item motion 17 is a broadly worded direction that talks about creating a strategic budget review process. If we can go back to motion 17 as the guidance to asking for the CLA, the CAO, and the mayor's office to work together and create that strategic budget process, but also to look at those particulars in 97 and 98 to be a part of that discussion.
Yes, we can do that.
That saves a lot of wear and tear in figuring out to every nth degree where we're going. But I think those 97, 98 give some very specific direction. The broader issue is memo number 17. So we can kind of incorporate 97, 98 into that, and we get a report back in 90 days. I think it will satisfy most everybody's concerns.
We've already held some preliminary meeting with the mayor's office and the CAO to go over starting to do just that.
Okay.
And this is Ben Sahel at the mayor's office. I think the other important thing to keep in mind is kind of thinking about really the outcome we want of this process. If the outcome we want is something that where we have a structural change in the city, where we're not dealing with these year-end issues, year in and year out, I mean, really we need to look at making some cuts where services are not justified, or where performance is shown that the service is not being done at a certain level. I mean, so long as we're willing to make those cuts for those particular situations, then I think this effort is going to be worthwhile, because whatever budgeting method we use in the end, whether it's zero-based, whether it's performance-based, so long as we're willing to make those decisions, I think it'll be a worthwhile experience.
Well, I think that's where it always comes down to, because there's as we saw in this budget, there's a difference of opinion at times as to what gets cut. And I think the concerns the council expressed early on in the process is, for the second year, the 1290 money is something that they do not want to lose. We did not want to lose sidewalks, we don't want to lose trees, we don't want to lose libraries. So it's a matter of whether we can come to grips with what is something that we can mutually agree on that's acceptable cuts. And what, just be very candid, I know from listening to my colleagues, they don't want to cut what they get their phone calls about. It's that simple. And the thing is that if you're not getting the phone calls, it's easy to cut it. And so our goal is to reduce that level of frustration in the community because they come to us for sidewalks, trees, library hours. Those are the things that are sensitive to council offices. So the process of how we get to the budget often is less important than can we come to some agreement on what the priorities are that serve the mayor's office and the council office. I think that's the number one issue.
And I think the other, I know, sorry I stepped out for a moment, but was on the zero-based budgeting, although talked about, I think it is very important. Is it difficult to do? Yes. Do we have to go by a certain formula on how you do it? No. The bottom line is we need to really look at department by department as to how they're spending their funds, because as council members, we get a budget book that gives us totals, and gives us line items, some of which we know and we don't know, and that it's April 20th when we get that, and we have 6 weeks, sorry if I'm repeating some things you said, but 6 weeks of us being able to actually determine that, and by that time it's too late. It's too late for us to be able to have an impact. And I think as Bernard mentioned, we really want a partnership going forward, and just as we talked about in the last item, which was on the encumbrances, again, we're the last to get engaged, but we're the first that are going to have to make some cuts when the FSR comes in. And so we don't want to be in that situation again and be able to have the conversations now. And so I think that was the reason for all of the language that was included there is we don't have to sign all the checks. What we really want to do, though, is make sure that the checks aren't going to bounce, and because we'll ultimately be responsible for that, as well as the mayor's office, too. And so we want to know ahead of time and work in concert with that, and also give some of the departments direction so by the time it comes out, they similarly kind of know the rules of the game. So I guess I would just ask, and I don't know, is it coming back? Is that what you've asked them to do, Mr.
Yeah, I'd ask that we, in 90 days, get this budget memo 17, which is a much broader direction, but as they consider number 17, that they look at number 97 and 8 as some criteria to incorporate into that overall strategic budget review process.
Yeah. I mean, and Randy Levin at ITA did zero-based budgeting, so, whether you agree or disagree, the process she went, but whatever, it's possible to do it, and if we can't do every department in this next year, let's pick those departments and start now, because I think when you look at October, November, December implementation of some of these things, it is too late. We're into the next year.
And we have started in that respect. That we've the mayor's office has set up meetings with some of those departments to have a conversation about their process. I mean, what we saw from ITA was almost the end product of the process they went to. We want to understand the process that they went to begin with, so that we know if this is something that's applied to other departments, kind of the challenges that they faced, just applying it to their own department. We want to understand that process.
Yeah. But again, the departments and running departments before in previous lives, public and private, those that follow the rules sometimes are the ones that are getting dinged, not those that don't. And so if you can get away with it, and they do. So I think we want to really dig in deeply into each of these departments and determine what our core services are and what they're not. Because the outlook, as Bill M. said, this happens every 12 or 14 years. Unfortunately, it's this year that's happening, and we're not going to see it change.
And that's true. I mean, we're in a cycle where we need to be really focused on everything that all the services that we're providing, and take a critical look. One of the things that we are going to do right now is I think in a lot of the comments and feedback from your committee is sort of you look at the incremental change, and we are going to be asking departments, along with our analysts, to start going back and look at all the departments and breaking down their budgets by services. Now, that's not going to what I'd call a level of the zero base, but at least for now, over the next 3 months, we'd like to break down departments' budgets by their services by dollars, by positions, et cetera. So at least it gives us a better understanding of what departments are doing and where some of the dollars are being spent. As Ben mentioned, the mayor's office is looking at the number of departments as far as zero-based. We would like to pursue that, look at areas where we think we can get what I'll call the biggest bang for the buck. And it may not just be departments, it may be, say, special funds, or it may be a particular appropriation account. I mean, we could be looking at our contractual services, for example. I mean, there's been a number of questions that have been raised over the years. We're spending X dollars, why can't we be taking a more critical eye at those? So those are some of the areas that we're going to be focusing on as we move forward.
And I think as someone who strongly advocates for zero-based budgeting, we have, I think, a great personnel here that prepares our budgets, but I think at the same time, having fresh eyes and ideas on how zero-based budgeting actually works, since I don't think we've actually done it as a process here in the city, it'd be great to see if we could get some outside expertise, in my opinion, to help us, to lead us through that process. We did that at the school district when we needed some additional support. We didn't actually do it at the end of the day, but it certainly pointed out a number of things that we could have been doing as we had went through some very difficult fiscal times. At the same time, I think we may not have the software available to us to do zero-based budgeting. I'm not sure how we actually, what we use, but it's a long-term process, and the sooner we commit ourselves to it, we would address it better. I predict that we're going to find ourselves for the next budget year as we started, and we're probably going to come up with a number of reasons why we didn't actually start it this coming year. So if we are going to commit ourselves to do it, I would suggest that we get to it right away and make a decision as soon as possible as to what is our plan for that. And I know a lot of that rests in the mayor's office, but I think the sooner we could commit ourselves to a path and if we're actually going to do it or not, and be serious about it or not, because we could go through a process and call it zero-based budgeting, but I mean, I know it's not, there's no one certain way of doing it, but we got to at least start down that path if we are going to commit ourselves to it.
Yeah, just to follow that with everybody here, having been in the private sector all my life until I turned 60, we did zero-based budgeting every year, and it works. And once you get into the routine of it, it even works better than if you do it once every 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. So my suggestion to the mayor is that he get a directive out to all department heads, since they're accountable to him directly, that zero-based budgeting is the strategy, and come up with a way in which he can implement it so that we hear a comfort level, which I'd like it at our first quarterly review, that yes, we're doing zero-based budgeting, here's what the mayor has proposed, here's how the process is going, just to have some comfort that we don't get back in April, May next year and, back to the same old story.
Well, by charter, the mayor will be releasing a policy letter to the departments which prescribes the method by which we'll be asking departments to submit their budgets. At this time, I think the motion 17 kind of left it a little bit broader in terms of a strategic budgeting process, because
Right.
as Councilman Weezer has stated, the city has never really done this process,
Right.
and so there's a difference of definition of what zero-based budgeting is. So we, as the mayor's office, we want to understand exactly what it is, first of all, before we start dictating to departments how they're going to be submitting their budget.
And we
So,
like that. So
so there's education that's required on our end as well, so that we know what we're asking for, so that when we do get it, we know how to look at it and how to make those recommendations.
By the end of our first quarter of 2008.
But I think what's critical is the information that does come back, the commitment that's going to be required from council and the mayor will be to make those decisions based on that information that comes back.
Right on.
Let me just
And,
say,
and that's
one
when
of
it's going to work.
One of the things is that as we've gone through the budget the last several years and we give these very specific directions, the concern, and I think it gets lost in the translation, is that often we are trying to fix something that comes to us repeatedly, and then rather than get a response as to how we can collectively come with a solution, most of the verbiage comes back as to whose authority is to give the direction. We're not obsessed with the idea that we have to give the direction, but the issue is we'd like to see these issues get incorporated into some plan so that there's a comfort level that the $7 billion that we're spending each year is going to the right place and being used appropriately, or if there are guidelines such as managed hiring, people are complying with it. You know, those last-minute June letters that say, I can't make payroll, those are things that cause every department in the city to suffer because we expect X number of sidewalks, you don't get them because somebody couldn't control their overtime. That's the kind of thing we need as a joint effort to make sure that if there's a decision made that, as Mr. Smith says, this budget is not advisory, it's a budget, then we should hope people stay within it. And that's what we're hopeful that when we come up with this strategic plan, that the mayor's office is comfortable with it, the council is comfortable, but the real key is, are we going to hold people accountable to stay within it once it's decided? Because that's where it goes haywire, generally always in the last quarter of the year when you have less money and resources. So that's what we're trying to get to, and that's why I think in looking at memo number 17 is a very broad statement, but if we can incorporate these items 97, 98 into those and come up with some agreed upon process, then we can all work towards that and come to some conclusion. But right now, like I said, is that, like Ms. Gruhl says, we're putting forth the budget, the council approves it, we think we have gone forward, and then all of a sudden we're the last to know all the unraveling that occurs, and yet we're the first to get called when something doesn't occur in the district. So that's what we're trying to get some meeting of the minds on. So if we can ask on this item that the CAO, CLA, and the mayor's office work towards that budget motion number 17, but incorporate 97 and 98. And what we'll do is also hold this in committee until we, that 90-day report. And so we can get that back at some time and see exactly what the outcome of the three offices working together. Okay? Thank you. So we go to the next item.
Item number 4 is the CAO report relative to the governor's 2008-2009 May revised to the proposed 2008-2009 state budget and potential city impacts.
Todd Bowie with CAO. At this point, we don't have much different to report since this report was generated. State legislators are meeting in joint committee, and although many details remain, it appears that the LAO recommendations that are discussed in this report are not presently under consideration. Otherwise, given the condition of the state finances, the proposed budget would have relatively minimal unanticipated negative impact on the city at this time as proposed, and we will work with the affected departments to mitigate the impacts as more information becomes available. Most likely you'll see updates in future financial reporting, but no action is required at this time on this report.
Okay. Let me ask you, on the titles that you've come up with on the user tax and the Prop 42, the spillover funds, do we think as this goes on, we'll add additional titles or different funds that we're not aware of now that could be impacted?
In terms of?
As you're giving us a highlight of what are the funds that might be impacted by the state budget.
Certainly, I believe that all of these different items are in various states of consideration by the legislators, and so certainly they could move things one way or the other. There's certain things that apparently the legislators disagree with about the proposed budget, and either in terms of some of the financing mechanisms. So they most likely will need to continue to make adjustments in order to produce a balanced budget. So there certainly is a lot of room for them to impact the city further than what's been proposed.
And give us on the sense of the state budget, what the timeline for their fiscal year?
Well, through June 30th is when they are supposed to have their budget adopted by. However, they are not meeting that deadline. I'm not certain when they might complete their process. It still appears that there are a number of items that they have not necessarily reconciled between the two bodies in terms of the Senate and the Assembly, and coming together on what their final proposal is going to be.
So the thing, and one of the big issues, at least from the paper standpoint, they're still grappling with, what, a $15 billion deficit?
The state's deficit? The deficit mentioned in there is somewhat of the difference between the original proposed and the May revised. The governor in the May revised took some additional steps to help to mitigate that, and so at this point, give or take, based on what the governor had proposed, is a balanced budget with and has basically taken out that $15 or $17 billion deficit.
Let me ask, with their budget being due on June 30th, so there's really no timelines for us to monitor when they could come to the conclusion it's just open-ended?
I believe so. I believe it basically will continue until they are able to resolve.
Okay. Let's hold this item in each week until we have some conclusions and updates.
Right.
Each meeting, not each week, but each meeting, budget meeting, until we get some resolution.
I know that in 2 weeks, I think you had also asked for the mayor's office to report on the, Mr. Rosendahl had asked
Yes.
to report on the lobbying
We'll
efforts.
have that on the same meeting.
The last item on the agenda is item number 7. Item number 7 is the CEO report relative to a request for authority to negotiate and execute a contract with Bond Logistics LLC to provide arbitrage calculation services for all of the city's debt financing programs.
Good afternoon. Let me just ask a couple quick
Sure.
questions. On the sense of the RFP, just to give us an understanding, we sent out 8 and only 2 firms applied. Any idea why so few? Or is this a specialty that only certain number of firms are capable of doing?
Natalie Brill, CAO's office. I sent them to 8. We were sent them to 8 firms because that's how many firms that did California work. Even though their offices were not literally in California, they do California cities. So we sent them to 8 firms. When I did call 2 or 3 of the firms later to find out why they did not respond, they basically said, we're just busy. We have so many other cities. Every city has to do it. Most cities contract it out. So these are the 2 firms, one that we had been using and one that was fairly new, that responded. You know, the people in the East Coast tend to do the East Coast cities. The ones in the Midwest tend to do the Midwest. And these were the 8 firms in California, and these were the 2 that were interested in such a large contract. Because we do have over 80 bond issuances that still require arbitrage, not every year, but that we have about 80 to 85, and they all need arbitrage at certain times.
And just give us a layman's definition of arbitrage.
Arbitrage is a difference between the interest rate that we are receiving on those funds that are invested, such as the reserve funds, any outstanding proceeds before we pay bills, and the interest rate on the bonds themselves. For example, if you have a bond with, you're paying 4.5% to bondholders, to investors, and you have money invested at 5%, you would have to pay back to the federal government that interest that you made between 4.5% and 5%. That's what arbitrage is. The federal government loses money every time the city issues tax-exempt debt. So their response to that in 1986 was basically to say, fine, you want to issue tax-exempt debt, then you only can make up to the amount of interest in the bonds themselves. You issue at 4.5, you can only make up to 4.5. Now, sometimes we do invest at a higher rate, because that means that we have positive arbitrage, that we are investing our money at the highest possible rate, and we don't mind sending money back to the federal government. However, in today's environment, that's very rare. You know, we're getting maybe, on a good day, in the high 4s. So we're not making a lot on our investments.
Okay. Let me ask also, was a contract expiring as the reason for the RFPs at this time?
Yes.
Okay. And then, did it limit our ability in the sense of putting it out in the middle of the holiday season to attract
No.
people?
Nobody mentioned that.
Okay, all right.
Actually, it tends to be a quiet period for the market, so it's usually a good time to do RFPs.
Okay. And then what is the cost? Is that something that get on a contingency, or is there dollar cost to the city for their services?
It's a dollar cost. Usually, the reports will cost us anywhere between $1,500 to $2,500 a report, depending on what kind of report it is. Obviously, the more complicated the bond issue, the more complicated the report. We do it not only for the general fund debt, but for all the special funded debt. So those that bond issues that we did, for example, out of wastewater. Wastewater has a line item in their fund, in the SCM fund, the Sewer Construction and Maintenance Fund, for bond administration, and that's where they will pay their share. So it's about $165,000 a year that we pay, about $80,000 out of the general fund, and about $85,000 out of special funds, give or take. It's really depends on each fiscal year, but on average, that's what it is.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move that item.
That was the last item.
Okay, thank you.
No public comments then.
No.
CLA.